So thanks everybody for joining today. I'm glad that you are willing to be with me today for this 2-hour presentation. Really looking forward to it, which I am kidding. It is not 2 hours. Otherwise, people, I'm guessing, would be jumping right out of here pretty quickly, which we don't want. So like Nick said, we have the chat open. Feel free to throw questions in there. We can answer things as we go. We can make it a little bit interactive. All that kind of fun stuff as well. Let me see how I can get the chat screen back. Okay, cool. I got that back. I see Nick has all of that in there. So now we can go ahead and get started. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about physical security auditing, which is not your typical audit. I know that Compass is an auditing company where we often do this for various compliance reasons. So when we are doing our auditing here, hopefully we don't really conflate it as one of those types of audits. It's really, we'll talk a little bit more about what I mean with this one. All right. So as far as these physical security audits go, this is something we can do for you. I know Nick said that this is a DIY kind of thing. So if you want to try to figure out how to do these for yourselves, great. And we can talk a little bit about that as well. As if you are like me and you have curiosity about how to get into certain places or the physical security of random places, that's kind of the way that I think, and I know it's fun to do these types of things. I know sometimes I might even just walk around the grocery store, look around, look at certain doors and go, I wonder what's in there, and want to just kind of go check that out. Or sometimes you see like an upstairs, like, what's up there? With just that kind of stuff, which we get to have a little bit of fun with. So you can ask questions. We have the chat open for that. And then if you also want to contact me, my email address is there, and I'll also have it at the end. But I think you'll also be able to get in touch with us through other means that Nick makes available. All right, so first, let's just talk about some of the physical security examples that have happened. And I'm sure you've heard of some of these before, such as the Louvre heist. If any of you are in the Boston, New England area, you might have heard about the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist many, many years ago. There was one at a Pokemon store. How about one at Pittsburgh Corning? Talk about some of these. There's also jewelry stores, Apple stores. Some of these things you probably hear about. So the Louvre one happened last summer, where if you read the stories about it, basically what happened was a whole bunch of priceless jewels, art was stolen out of the Louvre. And one way that they did it was through what you can kind of see here, this ladder truck that they just kind of set up outside the Louvre. They use some cutters to go through some windows, get in to the building, which if you've been around big cities and you've been around some of these types of museum places, you'll notice that there's always construction, fixing types of things going on. So if somebody pulls up with like this ladder truck outside of a big building and puts it up to the, chances are no one's really going to bat an eye too quickly. So I think that was one of the things that they were able to take advantage of here. So this is one of the physical security breaches that we've seen that happened. Another one, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, where if you visit that today in Boston, they actually still have the empty frames hanging up on the walls, in part because Isabella Stewart Gardner's request when she created her museum was that nothing ever moves, nothing ever changes, so they didn't replace it. Now, if you're not familiar with the story, basically what happened was one night, two guys showed up as Boston police. They rang the doorbell. They got let in by the security guards, and the two thieves then took the security guards, duct taped them up, and then they spent, I think it was 71 minutes within the museum stealing priceless art. So they figured out this pretext of impersonating the Boston police, which when we do these types of jobs, we can't do that. That's actually a felony to impersonate any type of government employee, which of course, if you're going in to steal art from a museum, I don't think they really care so much about the felony of dressing up as police. So that one was a little bit less of an issue for them, but that was the pretext that they used in order to get into the museum in the middle of the night. Pokemon cards. Who would have thought that there's a lot of value to Pokemon cards? Well, if you're familiar with Pokemon, you probably know that there is value in the cards. And we can see here, basically what happened was over the weekend when the store was closed, some criminals just cut through the wall. And you can see where they just cut right through drywall from one store that was adjacent to the Pokemon store in order to be able to get in and steal thousands of dollars worth of cards. So really the reasons that I'm showing you some of these types of things is to start getting your brain thinking about what are the different ways that we could get breached. What are the ways that attackers are going to try to get in? And we typically think of the front door, the back door, but maybe there's other ways. The Louvre, we saw them go up to a top floor, to the second floor, whichever one it was, by a ladder truck. In the previous one, they just walked in the front door as the Boston Police. Here we see that they're cutting through side drywall. There was another one here that was a story, I think from about 10 years ago, was the Pittsburgh Corning company, which had all of its own intellectual property on the way that it was creating new glass. Now, Pittsburgh Corning, of course, is in Missouri. I'm sure that makes as much sense to you as it did to me. And one of the things that they noticed is they would have a couple guys that were just randomly walking into their facility, walking around their grounds. They found some of these on camera. Eventually, they escorted them out for trespassing. Now, if you look into the story, basically what it was is two Chinese nationals, CEO of a Chinese company, was looking to get the intellectual property on the glass. They ended up paying someone a whole bunch of money to get it, but it turned out to be an FBI sting. So the two people that were looking to do this actually got arrested. It's kind of an interesting story that just kind of shows the various things that are sought after. So it's not necessarily just going to be things like Pokemon cards or jewelry or iPhones or priceless art, but it is also going to be data and intellectual property that people are coming after. So this is one of the first things for you to think about if you're starting to think about the physical audits for yourselves. What are you looking to protect? Do you have just the data, kind of intellectual property type of information, or do you have that physical inventory? You know, we had the data, which was like that Pittsburgh Corning example, where they had the intellectual property, the patents, all of that kind of stuff for new glass. Or do you have that physical inventory of the art, of the jewelry, of the iPhones, of the Pokemon cards? What are you looking to protect? Because it could be a little bit different in how you view things and the ways that you might then get attacked. So you can kind of look at these as well. So often when we talk about this as well, when we want to do the physical security, one of the things that we are faced with is, why would I pay you to do that when you're going to get in anyway? And that's kind of an interesting response that we get to it, because we still do network penetration tests and we know that we might get in through those, so let's do the test. Same thing with the physical security. Like, are we going to get in? How far are we going to go? What are we going to be able to access? These are all the types of things that we're looking to find out. And if you think that we're probably going to get in anyway, well, maybe there's a few other steps that we should look at, and maybe it is going to be before we do any kind of actual physical penetration test or anything like that, which we can also look at how we're going to do that. But I also like talking about some definitions, because anytime that we describe these types of things and we want to scope it out and figure out exactly what we're doing, we want to make sure that we have the same definitions, because sometimes we talk about just having a social engineering penetration test, when that could also mean a covert entry test, or it could mean only a covert entry test. Now, this is one of the things that I like to ask when I do these. I've done lots of these types of tests here at Compass. And usually one of the things that I like to find out is, are you looking for a social engineering test? Are you looking for a covert entry test? Or are you looking for both? Where the difference is, the social engineering means I need to interact with people. Because I've talked with other people who do these types of things. They get hired to do a social engineering job, and they say, well, I'm just going to try to pick some locks at 2 in the morning. That's a covert entry. That's not a social engineering. Because if we want to test the people, then we have to make sure that the testers are actually doing that. And we want to test our people to be sure that they do have a good understanding of the policies, the procedures, and the training that they have been given. So for this, we want to make sure that we have a good understanding. Is this a social engineering test, meaning the people, Or is this a covert entry test, meaning doesn't matter if we can interact with people or maybe not. We just want to see if we can get in, or is it both? And that's really up to you to decide what's the best way. Now, if you're doing these types of audits yourself and you want to look at all the different options, you probably want to test both and see if there are different protections in place. Now, you've probably also heard that the human is the weakest link. Not a huge fan of that phrase because I really think that we need to have our security and our defense in depth, where humans need to be one layer of that security. Now, if somebody clicking on a link in an email causes your entire network to go down, I would say the problem was not the person clicking the link in the email. It was probably that you didn't have defense in depth in the entire network. We're going to have the same types of things happening here where we have our physical security. If you have just one person letting an attacker into the building, and that causes the entire corporation to go down, chances are the problem wasn't just with that one person letting them in. We want to make sure that we have lots of defenses in place. So normally when we're doing our network, our technical testing, these are usually the steps that we go through. First, you want to do your inventory assessment. You can't protect what you don't know that you have. So when we're talking about network testing or IT testing, where we're looking at our workstations, our servers, we have to know what's there. So the very first thing that we want to do is our inventory assessment. Once we have an idea of what there is between with our IP addresses, our servers, our workstations, which ports are open, which services are being made available, next we can go to vulnerability scan. So that way we can find all of that super low-hanging fruit to be, just throw a scan at it, see what it comes back with, see if there's anything that's an issue there. Once we fix those and we know that all of the things that a vulnerability scan can find, we go on to our penetration test. And now this is where the skilled testers come in and they try to figure out, what are the vulnerabilities that are there? Shouldn't really be anything that a vulnerability scan in itself is going to be able to find, because then they're also going to start chaining together multiple issues, weaknesses, misconfigurations, anything like that. And then once you are able to fix everything that the penetration testers do, you can go on to a red team assessment. Now, some people conflate a red team assessment with a penetration test. I like to separate them a little bit out, where really a penetration test is where the testers are trying to find all the problems, all the weaknesses, all the misconfigurations, all the vulnerabilities. Where a red team assessment is really where you are going to set up a one flag, one thing that the testers are trying to get into. Maybe you say, try to get into the CEO's office. Maybe that's the flag for the day. So that's really the difference with that, where it's going to be very specific goals. Now, the difference between doing this, where these are the steps for network or technical IT testing, you see only really one thing changed is instead of the vulnerability scan, we're going to do a physical security audit. So those two things in this context is where the similarity is. That vulnerability scan is really going to be like the physical security audit. When I go in and do these, it's really going to be very similar to a physical penetration test, trying to do the covert entry, trying to do the social engineering, except it's not covert at all. It's really walking around with somebody from the company, jiggling on door handles, asking to read policies, checking how good is the front desk, how good is the back door, all these types of things before we actually then start doing some of the testing itself. All right, so as for the physical security audit scope, that is always going to be the first thing that we try to figure out. And quite often when I get hired to do these and I have that first interaction with the client, I'm going to ask them, like, what are the goals? What do you want me to try to do? What is the scope of this? And all too often I'm told, I'm not really too sure. I didn't really think too much about that. Let's just see what you can get. I don't really, that's like a little bit too wide of a scope. And I really need to get a little bit more understanding and what's important and what's meaning. Because if I just walk in your front door, is that anything? If I walk around the cafeteria, is that anything? Because I have had some in the past where they said, if you just get access, unescorted access onto our grounds, that's a vulnerability. You shouldn't be able to do that. So it really helps if you can explain what is going to be the goal of this and what is going to help you to understand where your weaknesses are to be able to tighten up your security. So the question that I often like to ask when they say, I don't know, see what you can do, is what is the one thing that if hackers got it would put your company on the front page of the New York Times or put you out of business or get you fired? And that's one, once I ask them that, they're like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to get fired. I don't want the company to go out of business. And I sure don't want to hear that my company got hacked from the front page of the New York Times. So that's where they then say, okay, well, if you can get a list of our clients, if you can get into our data closet, if you can get into the CEO's office, any of those types of things are really what they then start going with for it. So that kind of gets a much better idea, much more specific idea of where that we are going with this. So that's the question that I ask. What's the thing that's going to put you out of business, going to get you in trouble, going to put your company on the front page of the New York Times or whatever the local newspaper is? If the hackers got that, that would be concerning for you. The other thing, as we start looking at physical security, one of the phrases that I like to use is let's not put a $100 lock onto a $10 bike. We need to understand that all of security is about risk management, and it's all going to be on a spectrum from absolutely no security, where anybody can come in and do anything they want, all the way to all the systems being completely unusable. We know that if we took a server and smashed it up into a million pieces and threw it all over all the oceans of the entire world, it's pretty secure. It's very unlikely that anybody is going to be able to get any kind of usable data off of that server. But it's also completely unusable versus just leaving a computer open on the internet with every port available with no username, password, anything like that. That's really the spectrum. So where inside of that spectrum do we want to fall? We need to be a little bit reasonable about some of these sometimes. And it's really going to depend on what is your risk and what are we looking to protect. So like in this instance, we have an old beat up bike with a brand new $100 lock on it. Is that reasonable? Maybe not. So sometimes when we're going through these types of things, we need to understand what are we trying to protect and how far do we want to go to actually protect it. So here's just a couple considerations, and you can see that it actually went all the way off the page because these are some of the things that we look at when we do the audit and when we do some of the penetration testing with it. You don't have to read all these. We'll go through a lot of them and see a lot of what they mean and what we're actually looking for with these. Some of them will make perfect sense to you, and maybe some others be like, oh, I didn't really think about that, or not really something that we were worried about, and maybe we need to be. All right. How
Patrick, I
about
do have one quick question that was sent in to me.
great?
We installed a badge access system about 4 years ago, but I've noticed people just hold the door for whoever's behind them. How do you even begin to address tailgating when it's basically become part of the culture? I fear most people don't want to come off as rude.
Cool. That's a great question and one that is going to be answered throughout the presentation. I love that. Nick, did that go straight to you? Because I get the
Yeah,
webinar.
sometimes
Okay.
they come straight
All
in.
right.
You can assign who they go to.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, we'll answer that as we go through. Tailgating has its own stuff in here, policies, training, all that has its own stuff in here because it falls under all of those.
Appreciate
So
that. Thank you,
that's
Patrick.
a great question. So let's start at the front door, because that's usually where most people start looking and have their most concern. A lot of these pictures here, I just kind of grabbed off stock photo places, so they're nothing in specific. So if anything looks like what your building or entrance or anything like that is, it's just the stock photo. Some of them I even literally asked AI to create. But we see in this situation a whole bunch of people loitering in a lobby. There might be a security guard or two, but can a security guard or a receptionist or anybody reasonably oversee this to keep malicious actors out? Probably not, based on what we see here. So this is going to be one of the places that we really want to make sure is the front entrance properly controlled? I was assigned by Compass to do a test, I don't know, a few months ago, where it was corporate headquarters. And the test time of year that they asked me to do it was January. So based on that being January and being in New England, it made it extremely difficult to even think about any back doors, side doors, anything like that. people just don't go outside generally in the middle of the winter in New England. It's just too cold. Maybe if it was the summer, people go outside for their smoking breaks, they go outside for lunch breaks, anything like that, or just outdoor breaks. But since this was a cold time of year, I figured out the only way to get in is going to be through the front door, which then had optical turnstiles. It had two security guards working, and I had to figure out, okay, we're going to have to go and interact with these security guards. They're going to be checking for whoever walks in the door. I did lots of reconnaissance, watched how they interacted with people, and then eventually kind of figured out a way to interact with them, coming up with a pretext that made sense for them and to be able to get through them. But basically, what I was getting from that was as I'm watching and seeing the front desk, I realized this is going to be the way that I have to get in. So this is going to be some of the thought as we're doing these audits is, does the entrance change for the time of the year? Does it change based on which floor of the building we're in, what doors that we have access to, anything like that. So we usually like to start with this front entrance. Like I mentioned, that lots of times there's optical turnstiles, and we can see here that somebody is even trying to tailgate already going through. We have two people that are trying to tailgate through one of these optical turnstiles, which makes perfect sense. Lots of times when I ask people, how are you going to get through this? They say, well, I'll just tailgate through. A lot of these optical turnstiles do have protections against tailgating. One of the things, you can't really see it in the image, is that there is often like a light or a laser that goes between the two sides that is looking for a gap between the two people. So if you try to tailgate and get through real quick, it's going to see that gap and alarms are going to go off. And that one that I just talked about at the headquarters, we tested that. They had this type of turnstile. And I said, let's test how it is set up. Tailgated right through with one of the people that I was working with, alarms went off. That's exactly what we were looking for. Now, other people will say, well, just jump it. That is an option, except if there is a security guard standing nearby watching these. If the security guard sees somebody jump the turnstile, that's probably going to catch their attention. Now, whether the security guard or receptionist or whoever is watching for somebody jumping over, that's part of your audit. That's some of the things that we are looking for, whether we have good physical security. Can someone just jump these? Because another thing that sometimes these turnstiles have is weight sensors on the top. So we think, well, just put your hands on the sides and throw your legs over the top. Once it gets over a certain amount of weight, an alarm goes off. Again, this is some of the things that we're looking for with our physical security in the audits and whether these are going to work. Now, I mentioned that laser that goes in between people for tailgating through these. There is a vulnerability to them where you can properly configure. It's a technique that a friend of mine from the UK calls the long man technique, where if you try to tailgate through in one of these types of optical turnstiles, but you use something to block the sensor, it is going to let you tailgate through. And that was something else that I tested at the headquarters that I went to. It worked. So basically, we see in this photo the person in white, if they had like a backpack or a briefcase, and they just put it in front of them really close to the person that they're tailgating and block the sensor is going to think that's a really long person because all it's looking for is a gap. And that's how it knows when the person has passed. So that is also something that is configurable with these. Roof access. This is probably starting to get to a place that you might not think too much about. Sometimes the roof of the building has a ladder, has stairs to go up. Now, if you're not expecting somebody to be on the roof, that entrance might not be secured too well. Why would somebody go up on the roof if they're not supposed to be there? That's a great question. And that's something to look into. Plus, even if the door up there is locked, is that something that is being watched? Does anybody know if somebody goes up there, or do they have infinite time to be able to pick the lock or get around the door somehow or find something else that is on the roof that is going to give them access? Maybe it's an HVAC vent that can be removed from the wall and enter the building that way. So we really want to go around the building and get a pretty good idea of what is going on through all the different entrances and all the different ways that somebody could get in. So roof access is another way. Back doors, do they completely close? This is one that I've heard multiple times that the door might not completely close. You might get an employee who wedges the door open because they need to come back in that way. Or I have a friend who tells a story where he was watching this one company trying to do his reconnaissance to get an idea of whether he was going to be able to get in, how long the way that the security guard walked did his rounds. And one of the things that he saw was that the door took close to 30 seconds to close after the security guard tested it. Meanwhile, in 30 seconds, the security guard was all the way around the building and not really watching that door anymore as it was closing, giving him an opportunity. I had a similar one at a client of ours where the doors also closed very slowly. It was an indoor one where they wanted us to get through the secure area where usually you had to badge in, and people would just badge in, go on, open the door, and go into the office. But within 5 or 6 feet, they would then walk around a corner. And one of the things that we noticed was the door would close at a slow enough rate that it wasn't even closed by the time they got around the corner, making it easy enough for us to also get in through the doors. But back doors are certainly another thing that you want to make sure are going to be secured. Uh, and this is one of the things that is super easy for you to check because multiple times we've done these tests and a back door was left open or ajar or lock was broken, hinge was broken, and the client will say, well, that doesn't really count. Can you take that out of the report? Because that was just a one-off. To which I say, well, no, because it could still be a problem when an actual attacker tries to do it. But this is also why we want to go back and talk about why you probably should do the audit first. That's the kind of vulnerability scan that would catch these types of things. If you're doing your own physical audits, before you call in somebody like me from Compass to do it, you're going to find that employees wedge the door open, or that the lock is broken, or that the latch doesn't fully go. Those are some of the things that you can catch for yourself. So that way, when I show up and I get in through the back door, you're not like, well, that doesn't count because that was too easy. You could fix it yourself with that type of check. Also at the back doors, this is one of our favorites. We find the employee break area, the smoking area. Just blend right in with them. We're going to stand there with them, make small talk, tailgate our way in once they're heading in as well. Sometimes there's the outdoor lunch area. Might be another one. We sit down, have our lunch, make some small talk, do some social engineering, talk some of the people up, and be able to get in through that one as well. Are the people really going to be watching and enforcing the anti-tailgating? Um, there's probably multiple times that we can talk about tailgating, and I can also tell you that for one of the engagements that I did recently, that was also their major concern, was whether tailgating was a vector for people to get in. And not only tailgating, but also what they called reverse tailgating. So what tailgating is, we're familiar with that one. The employee goes into the door. I just follow right in close behind them, grab the door, go in with them. Reverse tailgating is when the employee comes out the door and somebody is going back in, grabs the door and goes in. So their concern was, is one of those going to work? Because they had just done a whole bunch of training about anti-tailgating, and ensuring that anybody who is going in also badges in. So how do you work with that? My recommendation, and we'll see my recommendations here at the end, is really to have a strong top-down culture of security within the company and to have good testing, good auditing to make sure that the policies, procedures, and training is all well understood by the employees so they also understand why this is important. Um, so if you can have the policies, have the procedures, do the training, make sure that everybody understands how important this is and what that you are actually looking for to prevent this, well, then you can start doing the testing for it as well. So yes, it can be very difficult, and especially when tailgating gets difficult, where we will see times where maybe I will show up with my arms full of boxes or arms full of boxes of donuts or look like the pizza guy. That's another way that people can tailgate in. I know there's another colleague in my industry where she actually has a fake baby bump where she looks pregnant and she will come in with her back being all sore and stumbling up to the steps, just needing to get in. Who's not going to hold the door for her? But she uses it in that way. So that's some of the things that we need to have people understand, that all we really need to do is just to check the ID if we don't recognize the person, or if you really want, you can tell them, I'm sorry, but based on company policy, everybody needs to badge in at the access control so that way they know who's there, that everything is valid with getting in that way as well. We have our, I guess I jumped the gun a little bit here because we tailgating, great slide right here. We see this guy just like, come on in. So that's really the big thing that we want to watch for with that. People are just going to be too friendly with it. We need to get across to people that it's okay to, I wouldn't say not be friendly, and I wouldn't say to not be not helpful, but just to also understand that there's a culture of security. Where I say we also need to have this top down, we need for everybody from the CEO, the president of the company to require and want everybody to enforce the security policies. So we have to make sure that they are going to be followed, that they are supported, that if the CEO is standing there letting people tailgate in, everyone else is going to do it as well. So we have to make sure that these types of things are going to be followed all the way through. And again, for tailgating, badging in, seeing the badge. If you don't recognize somebody, um, you could escort them to security, or probably at least let security know, I saw this person come in, I didn't see their badge, this is what they looked like, this is where they went. Help. I understand if you're Bob in accounting, it's not your job to do security to a degree, but you can, Bob in security, go talk to the security guard and have them do it.
We did get some feedback in the chat. I don't know if you saw that, Patrick. Somebody had stated, I used to work at IBM Global Services, and their security policy was that tailgating was a three strikes and you're out offense and would enforce it actively. So that's a very interesting piece of feedback there. Thank you for sharing that.
That's great. All right. So the tailgating was a little bit of a social engineering, but if we want to get a little bit more into some of the physical security things that we look for, I don't have slides for absolutely everything that we're going to look for, but this can kind of give you an idea of some of the things that we look for and that we try. Um, One of the things that we see here is that the door hinges on the outside. And why would that possibly be a concern? Um, because in an extreme example, one of the things that we can do is we can just take the pin out of the hinge. And if those pins aren't in the hinges anymore, guess what happens? The door just comes right off the wall. So one of the things that we look for when we're doing these physical security audits is, where is the hinge? The hinge needs to be on the inside, and that's going to prevent somebody from being able to remove the pin from the hinge. And if that sounds extreme, that somebody is going to take the pins out of the hinges in order to open the door, it's not. Those types of things can happen. Those are some of the things to look for as well during these. All right, getting into these a little bit more, you've probably seen these double doors that have the crash bars. And sometimes there's a pretty decent sized gap between those double doors. What that piece of metal is, the black piece of metal on the right, is what we call a double door tool. Now, what that does is, from the outside, so if the gap is wide enough between the double doors, we can put that tool through the gap, turn it, and pull on the crash bar. It's going to let us then open the door from the outside. So this is going to be another of the things that we look for in the audits. How big is that gap? Or is there I don't know, I guess some kind of sheet of metal that goes over the gap that is going to protect that gap as well, so nothing can go through there. So that's going to be another of the things that we look for with those gaps. Or another type of door that we might actually go after, and a device that we can use is an under the door gap. You can see the light coming from underneath. And we also see that type of door handle. That device on the right is an under the door tool. Now, one of the things that we will use that for is that metal part on the left will go under the door, and we can then actually fish it up and hook it onto the door handle, to which then we have the wire on there to just kind of pull the whole thing back, and that makes the door handle go down. So again, same as the double door, vulnerability, one of the things that we want to make sure is that the gap underneath is not wide enough that we can get these tools through, or that there's no gap at all under there to make sure that that's not going to be another vector. And then one that some of you have probably heard of before is going to be able to use canned air. We see on the left here is going to be that request to exit, sometimes called a REX for the request to exit. Now, we often think, well, that's a motion sensor. So if somebody were to walk up to it, it's a motion sensor looking for a person walking. And one of the things that they found is, well, then what you could do is you could just kind of put a sheet of paper between the doors, wave it around, and that would trigger it. I've heard of people blowing up, putting a balloon through the door, blowing it up, letting it go, flying around could potentially trigger it. So what they do instead is these aren't triggered by motion. They're actually triggered by a difference in temperature. So it's able to, the request to exit up there is looking and seeing what is going to be the area relative temperature, and it's looking for a change because as a human walks up, that body temperature is significantly different than the ambient room temperature. So since all it is looking for is a change of temperature, one of the things that we can do is we take a can of air, which yeah, I actually have one of them right here. So we have our cans of air that I can just get at Staples. And one of the things we do is turn it upside down, put it through, and it's going to blow out extremely cold air. And you can actually see it on the right, that little cloud fog going through. And there's actually warnings on the canned air where it tells you to be careful because it comes out at super cold temperatures to the point where it then triggers that request to exit. So again, it's really going to be about whether the request to exit is properly configured and where it's looking. I know there are some that you can point that are far enough away that the temperature of the canned air doesn't really change what's nearby. Or again, you can also block the ability to put the straw for the can of air through and blow that cloud up by the request to exit. So these are some of the things that when we're doing our physical security audits, we're looking for because these are the things that the malicious actors are doing to be able to get into the buildings. Employee badges. Have you ever looked at social media for your company badges? You've looked at LinkedIn. Lots of times, what companies will do is they have volunteer days where they love to go out in the community and maybe go to the food bank and volunteer or anything else that the company likes to do. And they take pictures and they put it on the company LinkedIn page. All too often, somebody is going to have one of the employee badges on. And that's one of my favorite things to look for when I have to do some of these covert entry or social engineering types of jobs is I'm going to go on LinkedIn and look for the badges. For example, we look at these badges here. What I get from this is that it is going to be in this landscape mode instead of portrait, which is kind of important. So I know which direction the badge needs to go. I can see that the photo is on their right side, my left side when I'm looking at it. Their name seems to be on the other side. It's got that green circle. And one of the things that we have is I can create my own badge. There's little badge printers. If you go on Amazon, there's one called Badgie. I think it's Badgie 200. It costs about $500 and you can print your own badges. So I kind of also have my own wall of fame of all the different badges that I've created that help to be able to get in. So it's often a recommendation to look at social media, especially on LinkedIn, for whether your badges are going to be available there, because that's what I'm going to be able to use to create my own badges to get in. Now, of course, that alone is not going to be an RFID badge. That's not going to be something that can be cloned by looking at it. So really, if that's all I have to go on, all I'm going to make is a piece of plastic with my picture and my name on it. However, there are devices where you can clone somebody's badge. You see right here, there is the Flipper Zero, which is really small. You can kind of see how small the flipper is. It shows just in that person's hand because all too often employees are still wearing their badges publicly while they are not in the building. We hear the coffee shop is a great place to go find employee badges. And it would be very easy just to walk up behind any of these people and use something like the flipper and be able to clone the RFID on that badge, which would then allow me to create my own. So like I could then print my own badge that looks exactly the same. I could put the RFID clone on it so that it is actually scannable. So these are all going to be things that we're looking for as well. A very common policy with companies is that you do need to have your badge visible when you are in the building, but when you are out of the building, it needs to be not visible, not available. Um, and even if you just tuck it in your pocket, that's better. It makes it much more difficult for somebody like me to go into this coffee shop and know that you work at that company and where your badge is and to be able to clone it. So that's a great policy change to have people not make them visible when they're not in the building. Here is something that gave me some trouble recently, and a suggestion is to use odd lanyards and badge holders. Um, I've seen this a few times where a company will go and create their own very specific lanyard. And if you then also keep that information off of social media, it's really difficult for me to guess that. One of the companies that I tested recently did the badge holder thing where they had a very specific badge holder. I didn't know that going in. I just went in with my own generic badge holder. It caused me to get caught. So multiple people are like, you don't have the right badge holder. So I don't think that you actually work here. Let's look you up. These are some of the little things that, sure, eventually malicious actors could figure that out, but at least it is part of that defense in depth. It is another layer that could prevent them from getting in, from getting that initial access. Security monitors. Look at all these monitors that they're looking at. Now, all too often, we know that there are cameras that are going to be out there, and sometimes when we do these tests, we're like, oh, look, there's a camera there. The majority of the time, I don't care. And the reason is because most of the cameras and the footage that is being recorded is for later. Most times, there's not somebody actively watching it. It's really for after they get breached, they can go back and find out, oh, here's a video of the person that was breaching our company at the time. So is this also a concern? Remember what we talked about with the $10 bike and the $100 lock? Is this worth it to your company to have people actively monitoring the video feeds at all times versus just recording them? So these are another thought. Is anybody watching them? I had one time where it was a critical resource facility, a water treatment facility, wastewater treatment facility, and they said it was critical. They had cameras all over the place. And one of the things that we found during our reconnaissance as we were walking around and checking things out was they had a wall of videos like this, but nobody was watching them. So we knew it didn't matter if we got seen on camera right away because they weren't going to know about it until much later. There's also gaps, even if somebody is watching these. One of the things that we can look for is, can we sneak our way around the cameras? Can we hide in the dark? That's another thing that sometimes we'll do. We'll figure out where these are. One of my favorite things is I like to bring my tiny little drone in advance, do my reconnaissance where I'll throw the drone up in the air and looking for where all the cameras are, and then try to get an idea of what kind they are, what kind of angle of view they have, where they're pointed, which then can kind of help to get a map of how you can get around them. Again, this is part of the audit testing. So once you have an idea of that for yourself, that also will give you an idea of what kind of coverage that you have to make sure that people can't get around your cameras. Key security. Have you ever seen this inside the building where the keys are just left in the lock? Not overly helpful if that's the case, especially if that key is supposed to be protecting something sensitive. Also, lots of times these keys are a standard. There's not a different lock for all of these file cabinets all around the world. Most of them are going to be the same. And if most of them are the same, that means the keys are going to be the same. You can just buy the keys for a lot of these types of file cabinets off Amazon, which a few of us have done as well. I went for one of the recent jobs. I brought the keys in. I saw that they had all of their client data in the file cabinet. The key wasn't left in it, which was great. It was locked, but good for the client. They had rekeyed the lock, so it was not one of the standards. So one of the things that we look for here, not to leave the keys in, not to have a standard lock. And again, understanding what is our risk and how far that we want to go to protect these things. Maybe, the top drawer of your desk where you keep your pens. That might have a lock on it, but do we care if somebody gets into there and takes a pen? Maybe not, but there might be file cabinets that have employee or client data on it that we do care about. Clean desk policy, this is often a big one. I know lots of times people say, well, there's going to be the sticky note with a password on it. Yeah, that could happen. I did one for a company a while back, and this was just an audit where I walked around with the person that I was working with, and there were checks left on the desk from their customers. That wasn't supposed to be there. Other times there were computers that were still logged in. That was against policy. So these are some of the things that we're looking for is what is left on the desk. At that water treatment facility, I was roaming around inside, unescorted, and had access to a lot of their lab results and unlocked computers and things like that. So this is where a clean desk policy, especially when the desk is not doesn't have anybody at it, like at night, you want to make sure that you have that clean desk if there's nothing too valuable left on the desk as well. Computer input security. This is one that sometimes drives me crazy when I just go to my own bank branch. I'll sit in one of the customer service person offices, and they have their computer on their desk, and they have the back of the computer facing me, and I can see the USB drive sitting there. And my thought is, well, what if I was able to put some kind of malicious USB in there as well? They're not even going to notice that, but it is also possible to disable the USB drive. So anything that gets plugged in doesn't do anything. Again, these are some of the things that we're looking for the level of security that you might actually care about. There's certainly other ways. Put the computer out of reach, put the computer under the desk. But that was also one that for one company, I was asking them, they had all laptops instead of workstations, and I told them that I just needed to check the serial number on the back of the laptop, and multiple people would just pick up their laptop and say, here you go, you can check the serial number on it, meanwhile, potentially having access to those on the USB.
Patrick, I had one more question that just came in direct about a minute ago.
Great.
What's your take on security cameras that nobody's actually watching live? We have probably 40 cameras across our main campus, but realistically, nobody's looking at the feeds unless something's already happened. Does that still
Yep.
count as a control?
It that's going to count as a control, but it's going to be for after the fact. So that's going to help you to find or get photos, videos of the person that was there. So really, what is your level of concern? Do you want to prevent that person from being there as it is happening, or do you just want to document it? Because obviously there is also going to be a cost to having somebody watching those monitors. 40 monitors is probably going to require multiple people to actively watch them. So there's going to be a cost to that. Is that cost benefit analysis worth it? Or do you just care about having a photo of the person after the fact? It's really about what are you trying to protect and what is the level of security that you're interested in with that. Obviously, like a nuclear facility, you got people watching those cameras constantly. Um, at the local target, you probably don't have somebody watching those cameras, but they are recording at all times so that they can get the picture. So are you somewhere between a nuclear facility and a Target, Walmart, grocery store kind of thing? You need to figure out where it's worth it to you in that range.
Thank you to the attendee for the great question. Thank you for the answer, Patrick. And one kind of follow-up question I have on that is, have you seen anything out there that seems promising in terms of AI technology that could potentially serve that function, be your watcher? Have you seen any technologies that have that type of intelligence yet? Do you think we're on the horizon of something ever, or?
I think with AI, we're on the horizon of who knows what. I have not seen anything where AI is ready for that. I see huge false positive rates lots of times and mistakes with AI, so it's not something that I would necessarily trust just yet. But I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if there is going to be something where those video cameras can get watched by AI and trained to say, if you see anything that looks like a human, immediately alert. Which then you need to have a good understanding of should humans be on those cameras? Or, like in the example of the local Target Walmart, of course, there's going to be people on there. And really, what can you train AI to say, look for somebody that is going to be stealing things? I don't think we're quite ready for that. That's something that a human can trigger on, but I don't know that we're ready with AI on that yet.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. The reason I asked that question is because my doorbell camera recently introduced similar functionality where it now gives me the alert and gives me a little synopsis before I even view the video recording saying, hey, this is a delivery driver dropping off a package, or this is somebody ringing your doorbell in a
Yep.
white shirt. It's very interesting to see where that'll go.
Yeah, can't wait to see. All right, we're getting closer to the end here. This is another of my favorites. What's your disposal policy? I worked at a university one time and they had a 3-year phase out for everybody's computers. So you got a brand new laptop, and 3 years later, you got another new laptop, and your old one just went away. And what go away means is they gave it to like a local high school, middle school. Um, but when that laptop goes away, what happens to the data? There's lots of times that I've visited my local landfill and they have one of these e-cycling locations where there's piles of computers, and I just look at those with my perspective and go, I really wonder what kind of data is still on those computers, and I would love to see. So whatever your disposal policy is, make sure that you have a good understanding of how you are disposing of the data, making sure that it is not on there, not left in memory, not left in storage, anything like that, so that you don't have a breach that way, because breaches have happened. I just had a former colleague who said that he purchased a computer off of eBay, and it turned out that it had the company's usernames and passwords on there. So it wasn't really very well disposed of. All right, getting to the last one. The most important thing that we want for our security focus is we want to have skeptical people. We want to have people that are willing to speak up, people that understand the policies, the procedures, and the training that they have received and are willing to enforce it. Like we said before, this is something that is going to be about the top-down enforcement, so that everybody across the company is on board with the training, and is also on board with the understanding of the things that we are looking for. So we don't want to be rude. We want people to be polite, but we want them to be skeptical. So if we know that everybody must be in the building, or everybody who is in the building must have their employee ID visible, and I come walking in without one, somebody should feel empowered to say, "Hi, can I see your badge?" Or at a minimum, go tell security, like, "Hey, we saw this guy with glasses and a blue shirt. He didn't have a company badge on. He went down that way. You might want to go check him out." So that's one of the most important things, is having educated and empowered people to enforce these policies and procedures that we have in place. So when we're doing these testing, that's one of the things that I'm going to ask for. Show me the policies that you have. Show me your procedures. If somebody does get what sounds like a malicious phone call, somebody calls up, starts asking for information, what are they supposed to do about it? Somebody gets a phishing email. What are they supposed to do about it? Somebody clicks on a phishing email and enters credentials. What are they supposed to do about it? Somebody finds another person in the building that doesn't look like they belong, doesn't have the employee badge. What are they supposed to do about it? We want to have all of our policies and our procedures documented, so that way we can understand what people are also supposed to do. So here are our emphases. We want to have our positive security culture. I know lots of people in my seat love to do gotcha testing, and I don't like that. I don't like to do gotcha testing. I always like to use the phrase, leave them feeling better for having met you. I am on the same team with these people as I am doing the testing. So I want to make sure that we are working together. And one of the things that, one of the examples that I like to use is, remember when you were back in elementary school or middle school or anything like that, you probably at one time or another had a teacher you didn't like. You probably had a teacher that didn't work so well for you. Maybe that was a teacher who wasn't nice to you. Did you want to learn from that teacher? Maybe that was a teacher who embarrassed you and you're like, I'm not learning, I'm not listening to you anymore because you embarrassed me, you're not nice, we're not working together. That's the same thing with a lot of this social engineering and physical security testing. If I embarrass people, they're not going to want to work with me. They're not going to want to be better. They're not going to want to have security. They're going to think, well, we're adversaries. You just embarrassed me. I'm not going to work with you on this. So again, that's where you want to have this positive security culture from the top down, where people are going to be empowered. Some of the rewards that you can give people, maybe there's going to be challenge coins. Maybe you can give free time off. Somebody catches a phone call that is malicious. Somebody catches a fish. Somebody catches me walking into the building. You give them a free day off. some of these things can work out really well. And one of the other examples that I like to give is I worked at a company where I was on the security team, and part of my job was during the new hire onboarding. Remember when you get hired at a company and you go with HR and you got to fill out all the paperwork. And one of the other things is you spend an hour with the security team where they explain all the policies and procedures for the security. And one of the things that we had was you need to have your badge visible while in the building at all times. Well, as soon as that was over, they walk out, and one of the new hires sees this man walking down the hallway without his badge exposed. And he goes up to him and says, excuse me, I was just trained in here that we're supposed to have our badges visible at all times. May I see your badge? And the man gets a big smile on his face, says, yes, you can, pulls out his badge. Turns out he is the CEO of the company. And a few minutes later, he sent an email to the entire company, did a send all, reply all to the entire company, and said, I was just walking around in the hallway and my badge was not visible. Somebody stopped me and asked me to see it. This is the culture of security that I want in this company. I want you to feel empowered to ask anybody in the company to see their badge if it is not visible. This is coming from the CEO. Now, if the CEO is supporting this, everybody else is going to be doing it. Everybody else is going to be showing their badge. Everyone is going to feel empowered to stop somebody at that point when the CEO himself said, I got stopped. I showed my badge. This is what I want to see.
I had another question come in, Patrick. Do you have any suggestions for mitigating risks of someone impersonating a vendor slash service tech? Example, someone impersonating your ISP tech could bypass a lot of physical security measures.
Yes. I often throw out a challenge to people when I give talks about social engineering is there's one thing that you can do to defeat every social engineering, because what you're talking about there is somebody impersonating a vendor, service tech, your ISP tech, in some of these physical, is you need to verify and validate who they are. So your ISP tech comes up to the front door and says, I'm from your internet service provider. I need to check on some things. Well, that receptionist needs to say, okay, I'm going to go call the IT department, who is then going to escort you around. You could also have a policy in place that nobody shows up without an appointment. So that ISP tech shows up, you don't have an appointment, you can't come in unless it's going to be an emergency, which at that point we're going to go get the IT department to walk you around. You're a vendor, you're a sales rep, same thing. Maybe you're selling something to the accounting department. Great. We are going to go call somebody from the accounting department to come down and verify that is who you are and to ensure that you don't have access that is going to be unescorted. Now, one of the other things that you want to make sure that you do with escorts is that for every visitor, they have their own individual employee escort, because that's one of the things that we like to do when we get in. We will have multiple people doing the testing. And if there's only one escort, we're going to separate. We're going to try to roam away as well. So I see that people are having to go, but I'm happy to stick around and answer questions. Got my email address up there. If this is something that interests you, I also run the Layer 8 conference, which is June 5th to 6th, happening in Boston. Compass is a huge sponsor of that conference as well, where we focus on social engineering topics, exactly like we've been talking about here as well.
As a attendee last year, I would highly, highly recommend going. It was an amazing event. I did have another question come in as we, if you have to drop at 2 o'clock, everybody, don't worry. It will not affect your CPE certificates for attendance. Those will go out in the coming days, but we will continue here for a few minutes if any other questions come through. This is an interesting one. I work for a housing authority where many of our properties have several vacant units at a time. How do you propose security of these vacant units from homeless and squatters? Kind of an interesting question.
That is an interesting question. That is both a probably security question along with sociology and humanity type of question as well. But from the security perspective, it's really going to be about ensuring that access to those vacant units is locked down. I don't know if they are ones that they're trying to are available for future rent, or they're ones that are just kind of run down. If they're ones that you need to keep up and need to keep looking nice, well, obviously you want to keep the windows locked, the doors locked, all of that type of thing. And that's where your security team can be doing their rounds to ensure that the windows are still locked, doors are still locked, and if they are not supposed to have somebody in them, they could also periodically check whether people are going to be going in them as well. I don't have necessarily as much experience with overseeing housing authority properties and how much that you're allowed to do with going in, with security guards being able to check. I don't know if you have guards that are doing the rounds and can just jiggle the handle to see if the doors are still locked, or lift onto windows to see if those are still locked, or even to go in and see if there is somebody in there. But those are some of the things that initially come to mind for me.
I appreciate that, Patrick. I don't see any more questions. So